Now we want to talk about protecting the organization. And this is one of the characteristics of cults. It's in the list that we're studying today of characteristics of cults. But we're going to spend a little bit of time on this because it affects so many aspects of the cultic organization. In a cult, the group takes precedence over the individual. You'll see that in every one of these organizations. Whereas in true Christianity, the individual is what's important. Hypothetically speaking, what if Paul had found child sexual abuse in the church at Corinth? Could you even imagine him circling the wagons to protect the church at Corinth and protecting the perpetrator in the name of the church and condemning the child for bringing this situation on themselves? That's what we're calling protecting the organization. But it happens in cults all the time. Now, you can't even imagine such a thing in the case of the New Testament, but it happens in churches, cultic churches, every day. Of course, the granddaddy of the wagon circlers is the Roman Catholic Church. And it's an international, just bear with me, it's an international, institutional ring of pedophiles and sexual abuse specialists. And I don't say that lightly. I know that's an audacious statement. But the priests and cardinals and bishops and popes of Rome have had long experience in perpetrating sexual abuse against children and others and homosexuality. And these people have little voice, and the institution covers up the deeds of these people, and they run damage control when someone comes forward with claims of abuse. It is their policy, always their policy, to ignore the victim and protect the perpetrator, which is most often a priest. And the perpetrator may be well known to church leadership as someone who molests children, and yet the only action that is typically taken when a claim of abuse comes forward is that the abuser is moved from one diocese to another rather than being kicked out of a position of power and authority. And in that next area of service, the people in that area don't know about him, they don't know what he's capable of, and he creates more victims.
One of the priests who abused Gianni Bizzoli, Father Nicola Corradi, was transferred to another institute for the hearing impaired in Argentina, where he abused more kids. In 2016, he was arrested on allegations he'd abused 22 deaf-mute children over 30 years.
And we well know that they're going to continue this wicked practice on other unsuspecting victims. Yet that never seems to be of concern to the organization. Never seems to be of concern that if we move this person over here, he's going to hurt more people. How can that even be? I would expect just normal people to not want that to happen, much less people in religious authority over others. It's just hard to believe, really. And of course, many books have been written about child sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. Movies have been made about it. Documentaries have been made about it. Even without mentioning adultery or fornication or other abuses of power. An independent inquiry in France determined that about 216,000 children, 2.25 almost, children have been sexually abused by thousands of French Catholic priests, deacons, and other clergy since 1950. Just in France, just since 1950. And we think about how far back this goes for centuries. And an independent inquiry has found alleging the phenomenon was covered up by a veil of silence. Jean-Marc Sauve, head of the commission that compiled the report on the investigation, said the abuse in France was systemic and had been carried out by some 3,000 priests and other people involved in the church. About 80% of the victims were boys. And cases against the Catholic Church have been brought worldwide, and the church has paid out billions to compensate victims. In each case, investigators have found that the church knew about the abuse and covered it up. They circled the wagons. And we're talking about protecting the organization and the fact that in a cult, the organization takes precedence over the individual. The above referenced article said in 2002 the Boston Globe revealed the massive scale of sexual abuse on children in the Boston Diocese and efforts by the Catholic hierarchy to cover it up. Furthermore, those who have been at the center of the abuse complain that the financial settlements allow the church to escape true justice. It's just a payoff. Most perpetrators have not been punished, and the church grants compensation on a case-by-case basis without transparency. They're not repentant. They're just making the problem go away. One of the most heinous aspects of the Catholic Church's handling of this matter is the fact that they have allowed known pedophiles to continue to destroy the lives of others by moving these people from one community to another. In the U.S., determined reporting by the Boston Globe exposed widespread abuse and how pedophile priests were moved around by church leaders instead of being held accountable. The main point we would make about all this is that this is very typical of a cult where the individual counts for nothing. Doesn't matter how many lives they destroy as long as the organization is protected. In the U.S. alone, the church has paid out approximately $4 billion in abuse claims. That hard-earned money was given to the church by members of the church, expecting it to be used for church purposes and not as a price for abusing children. The website bishopaccountability.org is a resource for current news on the church's continuing pattern of defending the church at the expense of its victims. All of this material is widely available on the internet. Well, we spent a good bit of time talking about sexual abuse within the Roman Catholic Church, or cult as you see it. Let's talk about the Jehovah's Witnesses. Same pattern, same sort of thing. Jehovah's Witnesses are facing their own crisis when it comes to covering up sexual abuse within the organization. The organization maintains confidential files of thousands of cases of abuse, but they also have a unique policy within the Jehovah's Witnesses that ensures that virtually no one in their church who abuses a child will ever be held accountable for it. And they require that every case of abuse must be confirmed by 2 eyewitnesses. Well, in most cases of abuse, there are only 2 eyewitnesses, and you know the perpetrator is not going to come forward and identify himself. So you only have the victim, and so these cases never go anywhere within the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. When we get to the section on Jehovah's Witnesses, we're going to touch on this a little bit more. We got some interviews with people we'll play. In 2019, an Atlantic magazine article exposed the cover-up and the damage done. The article was entitled "A Secret Database of Child Abuse," and it begins this way. In March 1997, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the nonprofit organization that oversees the Jehovah's Witnesses, sent a letter to each of its 10,883 U.S. congregations and to many more congregations worldwide. The organization was concerned about the legal risk posed by possible child molesters within its ranks. The letter laid out instructions on how to deal with a known predator. Write a detailed report answering 12 questions. Was this a one-time occurrence, or did the accused have a history of child molestation? How is the accused viewed within the community? Does anyone else know about the abuse? And mail this survey to the Watchtower headquarters in a special blue envelope. Keep a copy of the report in your congregation's confidential file and do not share it with anyone. Thus, did the Jehovah's Witnesses build what might be called the world's largest database of undocumented child molesters. At least 2 decades worth of names and addresses, likely numbering in the tens of thousands, and detailed acts of alleged abuse, most of which have never been shared with law enforcement, all scanned and searchable in a Microsoft SharePoint file. In recent decades, much of the world's attention to allegations of abuse has focused on the Catholic Church and other religious groups. Less notice has been paid to the abuse among the Jehovah's Witnesses, a Christian sect with more than 8.5 million members. Yet all this time, the Watchtower has refused to comply with multiple court orders to release the information contained in its database and has paid millions of dollars over the years to keep it secret, even from the survivors whose stories are contained within. What do we see? We see in a cult The individual is not important, the organization is what's important. The article goes on to detail cases like Candace Conti's. Candace Conti, now 33, was raised as a Jehovah's Witness in Fremont, California. When she was 9, the elders in her congregation paired her with a man named Jonathan Kendrick for Saturday morning field service. Instead of going door to door to preach the Word of God, Kendrick would take Conti to his house and molest her. She estimates this went on for about 2 years. Years later, after Conti had left the witnesses, she discovered Kendrick's name on the federal sex offender registry. When she went back to the elders in her former congregation to tell them about the abuse, she was rebuffed by something called the two-witness rule.
I can remember feeling like, the inside of me screaming out to the people of the congregation for help.
This is the story of Candace Conti, a young woman stepping out of the shadows to take on the all-male leadership of a wealthy, secretive religion.
On behalf of the North Fremont Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses,
who she says failed to protect her from a predatory pedophile.
Just kind of screaming out for somebody to come protect me.
The elders told Conti that without a second witness to the molestation, there was nothing they can do. In many cases, leaders within the Jehovah's Witnesses have counseled those who have been raped, abused, and molested to keep the information to themselves and not to report it to authorities. One of those was Kimmy O'Donnell, and we will see an interview with her, who was physically, sexually, and mentally abused by her mother. When she reported it, the leaders of the organization were more concerned about the appearance of the Jehovah's Witnesses than they were about the abuse the 12-year-old had suffered. As a 12-year-old, she went to the elders in her congregation for help. They told her that she couldn't report her mother to the police because it would make the organization look bad. She recalled, they discouraged her from seeking counseling because a therapist might blame the religion or get the authorities involved.
If those brothers had helped me when I was 12, I wouldn't have had to deal with what I dealt with. They had made one phone call to Child Protective Services. She's still an active witness. She's around children. I have nightmares. My mom flushing kittens down the toilet, or tying them up in a plastic bag and listening to them cry and die in front of you. She's a psychopath. So you don't say anything. I just put a smile on my face. No one knew what was going on outside. No one knew, and I knew the risk that I took. I went to those elders. I was putting my life on the line because if my mom found out that I told anyone about the abuse, she would have killed me. And those brothers said, go home and obey your mother.
What about the Mormons? Well, we're not going to explore each cult in depth, but we're merely attempting to show the disparity between real Christianity and cultic religions. In Christianity, as we have said, the individual is of the greatest importance. Repentance is the prescription when one sins against another. The reputation of the church is important in the community, but it's better to have dirty laundry than to destroy a person for appearance sake. In a man-made institution, though, reputation is of key importance. We find the same mindset in Mormonism as we find in any other cult. Utah ranks number 1 in the nation in cases of child sexual abuse and number 5 in child abuse overall. In 2018, the Huffington Post recorded on the case of Christy Johnson, which sounds just like the cultic cover-ups in other institutions. A woman who filed a sexual abuse lawsuit against her father is claiming that Mormon church leaders knew about the abuse for years but failed to report it to the police. Christy Johnson, 55, went public with her allegations against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and her father, longtime church employee Melvin K. Johnson. During a news conference in Salt Lake City on Thursday, she contends that the LDS Church, while not named as a defendant in the lawsuit, was complicit in allowing her father's abuse of her and her siblings to continue for years.
We went to the bishop. My mom took us down to the church, but she went in and saw the bishop and met with him and told him what my dad was doing. And my dad was with the church education system at this point, teaching seminary. And so the bishop told her that it was hard for him to even comprehend that my dad would do something like that. And he said, you know that he will be fired and lose his job if this gets out. So you guys won't have money to take care of the family. And most importantly, it'll make the church look bad. This will be a bad thing for the church. And I'm going to ask you not to go to the police. And so she didn't go to the police.
That's kind of the central
And that's
theme.
the normal.
That's the normal. That's the central theme with a big problem with what your story is that your mom was told to keep it in-house and don't go to the police.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Mormon church has a culture, the article says, that protects sexual predators. But let me just say this, child sexual abuse is rife within our society. It can happen anywhere, anytime. It can happen in an Orthodox church just as easily as it can happen in a cult. But what you do about it is going to determine whether or not you're serious about protecting vulnerable individuals and having a Christian testimony, or whether you're just going to protect your institution and cover things up, which has been done in independent Baptist churches. Not surprisingly, independent Baptists have not been immune from these types of scandals. And what is surprising is that those who should know better take the same approach sometimes in denying, obfuscating, destroying documents, and covering up information that would help those who have been abused, and rather than protecting the abuser. Numerous cases in IFB Church where sexual abuse took place, and instead of dealing with the perpetrator, which is always a he was protected while the abused was shunned and shown the door. There's nothing any more wicked in the world than that. And so nobody's immune from this, but what's important is how you deal with it.